Welcome to Rod's Tabletop Hoops. Today is kind of a fun topic of discussion. I am looking over the history of tabletop basketball games, just an overview, not necessarily anything in detail, of what are known as fringe players. I've put on the board here XBs, and that's basically a reference to what APBA pro sports games are referred to their extra players they add to additional regularly issued card sets. And I'm going to start with the departure from the basketball world. And APBA was known for their baseball game and still is known to this day for their baseball games, which are fantastic. But APBA initially, back in the 1950s, they would come up with a roster sheet with 20 players per roster. And there was no additional players. So you were kind of saddled with the amount of, you'd get 8 pitchers and 12 hitters to play with for your 20 men on your APBA baseball team. And it took at least, I would guess, a decade or more for them to get into the extra player or additional players seasons, also known as XBs. But anyway, I'm going to use the Montreal Expos of 1975 as an example of the evolution of fringe players in tabletop sports. This is tabletop baseball we're talking about here, but they are the first ones to really adopt a method of getting extra players available to the typical gamer who likes to see those players that were on the fringe, maybe only got a handful of at-bats. I might be talking about 20 at-bats to 120 at-bats. Pitchers that might have gotten an additional 5 to 50 innings, but just didn't make the top 20. So anyway, the typical roster sheet for, say, a 1975 APBA edition, you'd get this in the mail. It looks something like this. You get this very weak paper, very thin paper that you try to keep in good shape so you can maintain your rosters. And these are the 20-man, God, that will not come out. The 20-man roster for the entire 1976 edition of APBA Baseball, which is the 1975 season. So anyway, I was going to use the Montreal Expos as an example. Here's their 20-men roster. You buy that at a standard price for APBA in 1975, which I could not even tell you how much that was. That might have been a $12 to $15 purchase for an APBA season. And then, of course, as an avid baseball fan of the 1970s, you'd want to get the additional players because you're only dealing with, in Montreal's case, like I said, about 8 pitchers and 12 hitters. And Montreal in 1975 was trying to improve, but they were still working off their expansion type work here, and they needed as many players as possible. So you get the standard edition. I've got 2 sets here. I've got kind of a paper copy of Montreal, and I got a full set of Montreal there. Let me take a look at those teams. And I created my own little roster sheet so I don't have to look at the little paper sheets. So I've recently done maintenance on this team. But anyway, I got this last year from a gamer who had it for a long time. And of course, he put every card into a plastic sleeve for durability and so if you have cheesy Cheetos fingers, you don't get them on the cards and create stains. But anyway, this is a beautiful looking set. And you get the 20 regular players. The reason I've got my other team out is this guy was so anal that he rounded the corners on what were known as the extra players. So I can't even tell, looking at these cards, which player is a standard player, which player is an extra player. These are just a card I printed out of the Team Master Game symbols and the regular roster sheet, the 20-man. But anyway, APBA was nice enough in the 60s, I believe, to start coming out with additional players for the 1976 edition, 1975 season. And this was always a great bonus for kids to play their games and have, like, say, Pittsburgh. What good is Pittsburgh without Kent Tekulve? Ken Brett, George Brett's brother. I mean, some great players like that. Well, Montreal had 4 XBs, and they were Nate Colbert, Pat Scanlon, Don Carithers, and Fred Sherman. So you could look at those players. You order them up from APBA, and this extra player set, I can't remember what it costs. I think it even says here somewhere. 96 players, $2.25. Paper's gone up. Inflation has gone up a little bit since then, and but these would be the 4 guys you would get. They'd generally be perforated, and you separate them just like that. So you get these square-cornered guys with a little bit of perforation, but you get a Don Carithers, who is a C pitcher, which is highly valuable. That's a starting pitcher. You get a Fred Sherman, who's got a flexibility of going starting and relieving, C and D. You get a couple nice utility players. Nate Colbert has some. If you've ever played APBA, you know that a 1 is a home run, a 3 is probably a triple, a 5 and a 6 are easy doubles, if not a home run on a 5 with runners on base. So you'd get some valuable guys to bring off your bench. You're not going to play them as much as you would the first 20, but that's definitely what APBA did for baseball. Just got to show off my custom envelope. I have this set of paper cards that I created. I got a copy of APBA 1975 back in the 90s, and I just recently decided to organize it. This is literally just paper cards I put into the same type of sleeves. Gives them a little bit of heft, and you can flip through them much faster if there's a plastic front and back on them. But anyway, that is my backup set of 1975 APBA. Which brings me around full circle to what APBA did with their basketball game. As most people know, APBA basketball was not anything special. It had a lifeline that was far too long. It was propped up by the APBA Game Company from 1966 through 1970. I think it lasted until the 80s, sometime during the 1980s. And then came back with an APBA Basketball 2 in the early 90s. Maybe one of Jordan's, the year he retired or the year he came back, 1994-95, they came out with a season and maybe one more season. Tried to alter the game, make it a little more fun, but overwhelmingly the reboot wasn't that much better than the original. And people have been using APBA Pro Basketball as a punching bag as one of the worst games ever created. But anyway, so I'm going to punch on them a little bit here. APBA Pro Basketball from day one. The first season was 1965 and 66. And here's the long packets, the original 65-66 San Francisco Warriors. 66-67 edition. But anyway, APBA, and look at the first card. The first card gets a little bit stained because it's either getting exposure to the paper or exposure to the light through the paper. I don't know, but it's obviously yellowed Al Attles, and then you got Rick Barry, who's a little bit less yellow. Keith Erickson, Fred Hetzel. I've never played a full game with these guys. I think I bought them off APBA back in 1983. Just thought it would be fun to try and play not the full game necessarily, because that game was terrible, but maybe play the shortened version, because I love to play classic teams, and there was not many other games with classic teams at the time. But my point is, APBA Basketball came out with 10 cards per team. And back in the 1960s, there was not a lot of... basketball wasn't what it is today. It wasn't a high money-making sport. So if you're paying... say Wilt Chamberlain, the 76ers, they're paying him $100,000. The team is just barely making ends meet, and that's with a very good season under their belt. There wasn't just not a lot of cash flow, not a lot of TV contracts, not a lot of all the little endorsements that they have today. But the point is, APBA Basketball throughout its entire lifetime, from what I can tell, they would send you this little sheet in the mail, kind of give you a little promise about the upcoming season, and these are the rosters. Well, if you look at each one of these rosters, there's just 10 men per team. No extra players ever made available in the history of APPA Pro Basketball. So not only did they have a mediocre to bad game, their rosters never reflected anything more than the top 10 guys. And of course, if you've collected basketball seasons of any other game, whether it's hoops, tabletop, pro basketball, or other games around, 10-man rosters are just not in vogue at all. You got to have a couple of those reserves, because 10 is just, players get hurt. You don't want to play with 8. You want to play with at least 10 almost every game, or have those players available. So anyway, this was just a typical APPA roster sheet. APPA, they had its short lifetime, but there was another game that came into play right around the same time as APPA Pro Basketball, and APPA should have bought this company many, many moons ago, and they might still be around if they did. Of course, this company I'm referring to is Pro Table Games Basketball. Believe it or not, I bought this game last year. I also got a free copy from a Tabletop Basketball Board Games member group, Kevin Hennessy, and found this to be a very entertaining game. But I'm not here to talk about this game, as I played it quite often in 2022. I'm here to talk about its rosters for its first few seasons. Then they, much like APPA, being a 1960s build, here's your Pro Table Games cards, the 66 Warriors, that same team. And these cards are very simple to read, and the game plays really well. And there's the Nate Thurman that was, if you get the original season of 1965-66, the Thurman card comes with a green writing, but there's nothing filled in the field, so they sent out a backup card, an emergency card. You can see it's not even cut right. It's just kind of an awful one, but at least you have a card with all the numbers. They just made an error. The only card in the 9-team season that has an error does not have a back with a Pro Table Games logo, but they knew it was quite urgent when you got Nate Thurman averaging 40 minutes a game, and you got to get him on the team. So team shot cards and everything. So basically you have 10 players plus a team shot card in every team for 65-66 of PTG or Pro Table Games Basketball. They eventually upgraded that, as I will talk about in the future. But let me get to a couple other things first, just the oddities of the Fringe player. And I'm going to pause this video for a second and set up a little bit of screen time here. I was just going to note, before I go into this deep dive here, older generations, as kids from the 60s and the 70s primarily, I would say, and early 80s, they were always looking for sources, pre-internet sources, to find out who were going to be those top 10 players or top 11, depending if a team, whether it's Fast Break, Status Pro, Strat-O-Matic, PTG Basketball, always wondering who will be the players that actually make the team and what players did not make the cut. Well, as you can see on this page here that I've brought up, the internet shows Basketball Reference, at your fingertips. And Basketball Reference can be an amazing tool. And most of their default listings, if you look into their basketball totals here, minutes played are under the totals. The players are listed from highest minutes played to lowest minutes played. So, for instance, this 66 Warriors team that I just brought up, Rick Barry, age 21, 2,990 minutes. He was number 1 on the team in minutes played. And as you know, in both, as described, APBA and PTG basketball, they only had basically 10 players per team. So you knew that once you got past, as long as none of those players in that list had been traded, if you go to rank 1 through rank 10 there, you can see that it's going to be Barry, Rogers, Thurmond, Masheri, Adles, Newman, McLemore, Phillips, number 8, Fred Hetzel, number 9, and Keith Erickson, number 10. No Will Frazier, no Bud Olson, number 11 or 12. And see, Bud Olson played in 55 games. It would have been nice to have a Bud Olson on your team. But as I was mentioning, pre-internet people were forced to go with sources like the Sports Encyclopedia of Pro Basketball. This is the 1981 to 1992 edition, or 1891. It says 1891 to 92 edition. This goes through 1992. And this was my big source as a child. I just reacquired this one. I had a water-damaged copy. It got damaged back in the 80s, and I finally went back on eBay and found the Sports Encyclopedia Pro Basketball. This goes from the earliest times in the NBA, 1891, to about 1975. So, and once again, much like the Basketball Reference, you go look up a team like the Celtics of 1961, and they're listed. A starting lineup is listed, but they're also listed in order of minutes played. So you could do your simple math and go, okay, we know we're going to get the top 5 here, but then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more guys. Tom Sanders will be the last guy you'll get, and Gene Guerrilla is not going to be on the team unless you have more than 10 players, 10 plus additional XB's players. So anyway, I was just demonstrating that to show the, if you've got APPA and you never go beyond 10 players, you're going to be shorted some players. And there are other games out there that I'm going to touch on in a minute that will help you get those extra players. One of those would be Hoops Tabletop Pro Basketball. Now, if you go with 1970, Los Angeles Lakers are always one of my favorite examples. You can see here on the regular season averages, Wilt Chamberlain, under per game in Basketball Reference, he's listed as the number 1 player because he averaged the most minutes per game. But look at the amount of games played, 12 games. Wilt had a devastating knee injury, leg injury during the 1969 portion of the 69-70 season, and he played about 8 or 9 games and went down for the count. And the Lakers, they suffered a little bit because of that. They only won 46 games. Also, Elgin Baylor missed 28 games as well, if you can see those numbers right there. But let's try to zoom it one more time. Oh. Anyway, so Wilt was there, but he averaged 27.3 points, 18.4 boards. A typical board gamer would want to see Wilt's card. And of course, I had to look at, everybody had to look at the minutes played. But if you made the top 10, well, let's take a look. I got it by order of minutes played here, and Wilt barely scrapes by at 505 minutes. So he's the 10th man, and he makes virtually every roster in tabletop basketball. But looky there. Look at what if Bill Hewitt had played 25 more minutes, or 26 more minutes, or 28, whatever it takes. Do the math. If he'd played 26 more minutes, he would have 506 minutes, and Wilt Chamberlain would be bumped off that roster. So you're trying to replay a season, and you have Wilt, just say you don't have Wilt Chamberlain, and this Laker team made it all the way to the NBA Finals because Wilt came back with about 3 or 4 games to play, and then played a monstrous playoffs. He played incredibly well, in the playoffs, got all the way to the finals. Game 7, played 47.6 minutes per game in the playoffs, 23 points, 24 rebounds, and 4 assists. One of the more remarkable recoveries in the history of the NBA to make it back for the finals, even though they lost in Game 7. And what a nightmarish Game 7 for the Lakers that year. But if you're playing APPA, you've just barely scraped by. If you're playing PTG basketball, you've barely scraped by with that 10th in minutes played portion of the roster. Now, where you slightly miss out, this is not as big a deal. Well, let's go to the 71 Lakers. The 71 Lakers had a second to last season if you want to call it that, for Elgin Baylor, who was a pretty good player. 10 first-team All-League teams, and 10 every year he made the All-League team. He was first team. One of the greats of all time. Really doesn't get talked about enough as he should. But anyway, Elge was 36 years old at the time, and as you can see where the highlighted portion is, he only played 2 games, which that's not close to a season. Probably does not merit a card. He had a leg injury that just wouldn't allow him to play much. He tried to come back in 72 as well and played another 8 or 9 games, and that was it for Elgin Baylor's career. He missed out on a championship by just a hair because the Lakers won it in 72. But anyway, looking at the total minutes played here, Wilt's number 1, happy. West got injured for the playoffs in 71, I believe, and the Lakers just were not going to go very far without their, Jerry West. But we get to player 8, Rick Roberson, player 9, Fred Hetzel, Pat Riley, number 10, and then finally 11 was John Tresvant, and number 12 is Elgin Baylor. So if you got APPA for 1971, you're not going to get that guy. You're going to get PTG for 1971. You're not going to get that guy. Well, flash forward a few decades later, and a game company called Hoops Tabletop Pro Basketball by Mark Vasilio comes out, and voila, Mark's Hoops teams have no more or no less. Well, less if they don't have a qualifying player than 12 players per team. So, well, look who's number 12, Elgin Baylor. So for the 1971 Lakers, there's an Elgin Baylor. And there's Elgin right there, a 2-game card. Of course, he has a DNP, does not play. If you pregame roll in hoops, you got to roll a 12 for him to play. But then again, I'm just a fringe player nerd. I just find this fascinating. A card is actually manufactured for a player that plays just 2 games. And we know it in baseball and other sports. They've had guys with 1 at bat or 2 innings pitched, and they throw them on a roster because the rosters are much bigger in this modern day of gaming. But for them to have an Elgin Baylor in 1970-71, it's just fascinating to me. I just love that, And the 70-71 season wouldn't be the same for me without having at least the opportunity to play Elge with his, great teammates like Jerry West or the Dipper one more time in 1972. If that came out in 1972, if these season cards, this was made within the last 5 or 6 years, I would just be head over heels being able to play Elgin with my team and not have to try and make up my own card. Going back to 1970, there's a full bunch of oddities for the 1970 cards that I just find fascinating. And I'm going to use Hoops Tabletop Pro Basketball as an example here. I'm going to try and get back to my NBA. For instance, let's take a look at the Philadelphia 76ers. This is just an oddity, and I love oddities in tabletop gaming. I love fringe players. If you go to the totals and minutes played here for the Sixers, you can see that 1 through 11, you got Bud Ogden going by the model with Hoops Tabletop Pro Basketball. They have 12 players per team. Well, looky there. Dave Schultz, 21 years old Dave Schultz, played 1 minute, shot 1 for 1 from the field. So he scored 2 points in 1 minute. Didn't grab a rebound, didn't do anything else. But if you do the math, 1 minute, 2 points, that's 96 points per 48 minutes. So, and you can look per 36 on Basketball Reference. It's, 72 points. 72 points per 36. Well, of course, Mark Vasilio's team came out with computer-based versions and carded versions of a player who shot 1 for 1. And he's got, if you're familiar with Hoops Tabletop Pro Basketball, Dave has an X10, which only guys like Wilt Chamberlain get. And he pretty much, I played one game with him, and I started him along the front line with Billy Cunningham, and he threw in 60 points for me. So he didn't throw in I think I played him 40 minutes and just tried to totally abuse the system of of what these players are supposed to be played. Obviously, he's supposed to not play much at all. But, once again, another 2-11. Let me go back and find another example here. 1970 is such a great example. Cincinnati Royals. People who are high into stats, they'll know where I'm going here. Cincinnati Royals, coached by Bob Cousy. So there's the per game stats. There's the minutes played stats. Let's look at the minutes played. The top 12 for Mark Vasalio. You get the top 12 players. And, well, you look on the surface, and it looks like Bob Cousy is bottom of the list here. He came back as a player coach, just mostly coach. But he ended up playing 34 minutes. Well, it turns out a couple of these players in this top 14 got traded, including Jerry Lucas. I can't exactly tell you the other player. It could have been Wally Anderzunas. But anyway, Bob Cousy advanced into the top 12. And there you go. The Coos. So once again, DNP 2-10 because he played 7 games, 34 minutes. 1 for 3 from the floor, 3 for 3 from the free throw line. So his free throw shooting is fantastic. Of course, Mark makes him 2-11 and not 2-12, even though he's 100%, just to give him a chance of missing a shot. He's a fantastic passer, and steals are estimated for the Coos. But how often do you get Bob Cousy playing alongside Oscar Robertson? So in a fantasy world here, you can play those guys together. I don't know how many times they ever stepped on the floor at the same time as teammates. They obviously faced off against each other many times in the past. But anyway, moving right along, we get into some other odd years. I'm going to move over to one of my favorite games for just a second here, and it's the 74 season of Fast Break. Now, Jim Mickey put out Fast Break seasons for a number of years, and this is what typically happens in Fast Break. You get a guy like Jim Mickey who creates a wonderful game. But the first season of Fast Break was 1973-74, and as many know, that's the only year that Jim Mickey went with 10-man rosters, did not go with full player rosters. So you were stuck with the top 10. And therefore, like in 1974, you look at the top 10 minutes played, and you're down to Mel Counts' number 10, but you're knocking out a guy like Kermit Washington or Travis Grant. And so there's a guy like me. So 1974, let's see. Voila. Kind of made my own Fast Break cards and everything, but yeah, you're kind of shorted on players. Team Triggerman cards, but these are the original player cards. This is Connie Hawkins, Jerry West, Goody, Goodrich, Stan Love, Kevin Love's dad, Jim Price, Pat Riley, Elmore Smith, Connie Hawkins. There's a lot of entertainment value here with 10 guys, but as a little kid, you're like going, God, I wish I had an 11th man. So, of course, I don't know if you were anything like me. You start creating your own player. I don't know why there's X's through this card, but as a kid, I decided to make my own Kermit Washington. And there he is, playing forward and center. I don't know why I gave him 3 or 11 on playing, but because Kermit played in 45 games, he should have had like a 4-7 on a pregame injury. But anyway, I made a Mo Layton for the Blazers of 74, a Dave Stallworth in 74. So, but anyhow, that's how desperate, when you're a young kid and you have plenty of time on your hands, you decide to make your own Fringe player cards. I mean, the same was true. You get a season and there's a big rookie that comes into the league, whether that's Michael Jordan or someone is less popular than that. But you start making up a Magic Johnson or a Larry Bird because you bought the 1981 edition and you want to play Magic or Larry Bird, even though, or let's say 1980 edition, and you're playing 78, 79 season of cards, and Magic obviously makes a big difference. And so you make up your own Fringe card or bonus card or XB, however you want to put that. I'm going to depart. Well, let me see. Let me get back to another case study, the 1973-74 Knicks. Probably my biggest disappointment in Fringe player card history. Once again, Jim Mickey and Fast Break, they came out with 10-man teams. Every other year, they came out with more than 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 sometimes. And so, who's missing? If you look at this chart over here, you can see, I don't know if I can bump that size up. Nope, I cannot. There we go. Under the totals, under minutes played, Willis Reed is 36 minutes behind Hawthorne Wingo, of all players. So, there you have it. Hawthorne Wingo is going to make the team. And, he's a little less prominent than a player named Willis Reed, who played 19 games and a whole 36 minutes less than Hawthorne Wingo. So you have to start Jerry Lucas at center, DeBuscher at forward, Frazier at guard, Monroe at guard, Meminger at guard. John Gianelli gets a lot of playing time. Phil Jackson might even play a little center because you're without Willis Reed, unless you create your own Fringe player of Willis Reed. He's the only guy I truly recreated in the 1974 season because I wanted to play Reed with his teammates one last time. Reed ultimately retired after the 1973 and 74 season. So that was it for Willis's career, but it was really cool to actually make up a card. I actually made that card up when I was a teenager, and I mailed that off to Jim Mickey at Mickey Games, and he replied with a note saying, the card looks good. So I found that had to be a certified Jim Mickey card. As a younger teen, that was quite great news to get a reply from Mickey Games. What a wonderful company they were. All right, another example of extra players, Fringe players, comes from a game that, let me take a look if I have the box nearby. All right, this is the first iteration of what became Status Pro basketball, but it's the NBA Players Association basketball game. This box is too big for my screen, but anyway, you get the feel for it. This is quite a cool game, but the big question is, did they have extra players in one of their earliest years? So this is the 72, 73 cards. I also got some 74, 75, 76 season cards. I purchased these just over a year ago. Now their roster sheet looks like this. This is the 75, 76 roster sheet. And I've got this season of cards, but you can tell already, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. They got at least 12 guys per team. So kudos to NBA Players Association basketball game for having rosters that are greater than the standard 10, which is disappointing to the avid, statistically inclined basketball gaming fan. My 72, 73 cards look a little bit like this, and I was trying to check to see if the earliest season of cards, did they have more than 10? And I ended up counting out the Detroit Pistons: Stu Lance, Curtis Rowe, Mengel, Aaron Mueller, Bob Nash, Willie Norwood, Fred Foster, streaky shooter, Dave Bing, classically amazing guard, Jim Davis, Don Adams, and Chris Ford, who just passed away recently, R.I.P., and Bob Lanier, who passed away recently as well. Fantastic people, fantastic players. But this totaled out to 12 cards. So kudos to earliest versions of Status Pro, Stu Lance, broadcaster for the Lakers. Kudos to these Status Pro people for doing that. Now, I know that they must, in this day and age, I don't play a lot of Status Pro, but I'm certain that they have more than 10 men per roster now. And maybe with the modern day rosters ballooning up to about 15, they might have a 16, 17, 18 man roster if you really want to have every player who played in a game with an NBA team in this day and age. Which brings me along to my another game I haven't touched on as much because I don't know as much about it, and that is Strat-O-Matic basketball. I own actually 2 seasons. One was like a printed off the computer game, but this is the season I own, the 91-92 edition, 1990-91 season of Strat-O-Matic basketball. And as you can see, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Atlanta Hawks on this team. But look, you go down low, and there's the additional players. Atlanta has Rumeal, the real deal Robinson, and Trevor Wilson of UCLA. 26 additional players in all. And that's a great thing. I mean, the Portland Trailblazers of 90-91. Are they over here? Here's the Western Conference. Where's my Portland Trailblazers? Well, they've got 10 players there, but I also want to see my extra guys. They were a fantastic team. And sure enough, Portland has Allah Abdelnaby and Mark Bryant as backup. So generally 12-man rosters max on the Strat-O-Matic pro basketball game. So that's fantastic. You can't go wrong. I'm just going to take a look at the one of my seasons, my 90-91 Boston Celtics. They were at the end of their dynasty, the end of their run. Larry Bird was getting hurt quite often, but once again, you get all 10 regular guys. Who are the Celtics? Vrankovic and Dennis Popson. Where's Pops? Where are the extra players? I want to see them. There's D. Brown. Oh, there's advanced defense. Trying to see if I have my extra players included in here, because I have not played these Celtics. Oh, there's Dave Popson. I had Dennis Hobson in my head. Dave Popson and Stojko Vrankovic. There they are. So, anyway, quite a fun group of cards there. I got to play a little bit more, get a little bit better at Strat-O-Matic basketball. It's just a little different flow than Hoops, Tabletop, Pro Basketball, and Fast Break Basketball. It's a little more, you're making a lot more decisions on the court. And some people love that. Status Pro is a little bit like that as well. You're passing the ball around, passing to choice, feeding players that you want to feed it to, whereas other games, Fast Break and Hoops are my favorite. They kind of auto pass to certain players. And you can make choices within reason, particularly with Hoops, especially if you have shooters of the same rating and skill level. So you can modify that as needed. All right. Well, I was going to go into one more of my favorite extra player squad setups. This is the 1977-78 Rockets. There's always a team. This team was terrible. Sixth place, 28 wins and 54 losses. But if you look at the amount of talent that they have on their roster, there's no doubt that the Rockets would have made the playoffs had they been healthy in 1977-78. They featured injured players like Moses Malone, who only played in 59 games, Mike Newlin, 45 games. Rudy Tomjanovich was nearly killed by a punch from Kermit Washington and missed 3/4 of the season. Fortunately, he made a big recovery and came back in pretty good form in 1978-79, considering the circumstances. So it's just kind of cool. But anyway, this fast break, I was going to use an example here for my Rockets. They came out with a bunch of extra players. Even Rudy Tomjanovich, I see him here, is roughly 9th on the team in minutes played, but I think they made him, I'm trying to remember if they made him an extra player or not. But anyway, here is the old school roster sheet from 1979 edition, 1977-78 season of Fast Break Pro Basketball. Now, if I touch on the Houston Rockets, which are over here, it's Kunert, Malone, Jones, Kupek. So even though Kupek was 11th on the team in minutes played, he made the original roster. Reed, Bradley, Ratliff, Newland, Murphy, and Lucas were the top 10. Even though Rudy Tomjanovich was 9th on the team in minutes, I'm just kind of realizing this, they included him as one of the 35 additional players for 77-78. Was Zaid Abdulaziz, Rudy, and a Mike Dunleavy. So isn't that fascinating? I'm not sure exactly what went into the mentality there. Maybe they needed players to fill a position. But CJ Kupek, I mean, maybe they needed a backup center? I have no idea. But for some reason, that's what happened. And sure enough, this team, if you decided to do a fantasy modification and say, I'm going to play Rudy Tomjanovich and his, 21.5 points per game, I'm going to play him 75 games instead of 23. You would definitely have a player that would make a difference for a team going to the playoffs or not. Aziz, there's your 14th man or whatever they have. They had 3 extra players, so they had 13 guys. So Aziz, formerly Don Smith, not going to help you much on defense, but he does draw a lot of fouls. And Mike Dunleavy, an up-and-coming player, but rated poor on defense by Fast Break. There's the great Moses. You play him, say 75 games. This team will win. This team's going to win some ball games with those players in the lineup. I mean, Calvin Murphy, as a result of the injuries, had a career year at 25 points a game. And I'm not a humongous Rockets fan, but they did acquire my favorite player, Rick Barry, toward the end of his career. So it's kind of fun to see what the pre-Rick Barry Houston Rockets look like. This is the year before John Lucas went to the Warriors as compensation for Rick. And what a fine player he was. Of course, he had some personal issues, which derailed his career, but when he was on, he was very good. And Kevin Kunert, the backup center. But anyway, you take a team like the Rockets, 28-54, 24 games out, you play those players a certain, unusual, you turn back the clock and you take away those injuries, and the Rockets are a competitive and contending team. Finally, I'd like to end this Fringe Player XB's Player video with a look at one of the most interesting teams of extra players I've ever seen. They're known as the Memphis Tams. They played in the ABA during 1972-73 and the 73-74 seasons. And they had just been purchased by Charlie O'Finley, well known as the owner of the Oakland Athletics. He even changed the colors of the team. They were the New Orleans Buccaneers originally in the ABA. They moved to Memphis as the Memphis Pros, and they just struggled to get attendance. They lost players like Jimmy Jones, Steve Jones, and Gerald Govan, and they have ended up as the Memphis Tams. And the reason they're called the Tams is simple enough. They had a poll among the fans to say, what should the new name of the team be? And a $2,500 prize was awarded for the winner. The name most picked was Tams, because Tams was a combination of a team very near Tennessee, Arkansas, and Mississippi. I think they played some secondary games in those states as well. And so Tams became the team name. And as you can see, they got the players here wearing the obvious hats and things. And here is their team logo right there. There's the Tams. Back in 1972-73, I made this envelope to represent my PTG basketball version of the Memphis Tams. But anyway, the Tams were not a very good team. They finished, like I said, with 24 wins and 60 losses. They just were in disarray almost the entire time. But anyway, Memphis had a roster, and you can see they utilized basically as many as 21 players during the regular season. They were led by George Thompson, a pretty darn good guard. Randy Denton, as famous for his hair as for his play as a good shooting center. But anyway, what I found interesting about the Tams was that PTG, after many, many years of not having ABA player seasons of cards, and many, many years of not having even having ABA seasons or extra players, came out with a Fringe player sheet here. So if you can get a template out and enter each player by number, because as many know, the PTG card looks a lot like this. Let's see if I can find one here. Here's Johnny Newman. Flash in the pan Johnny, got a lot of money to play basketball. But the cards are numbered 11 through 66. So you could literally go to this chart here and make any Fringe player you want, fill in all the information on a blank card, which I'm pretty sure PTG was still selling in the last few years. And you can see the players' games played marks, and they were not very high. They arranged they got Roger Brown, not the Roger Brown, another 7-foot Roger Brown, 6'11" Roger Brown. And that's an error in printing as well. They got him listed at 6'11", 130 pounds, if you can see where I've got my cursor right over here. But anyway, but you look down this list, and each team has 3 players. Some played, Ira Harge played 4 games. A lot of these players played with a second team as well. So there was a big, you can actually have players play on a secondary team. PTG was not averse to putting a Fringe player from another team together as well. And there's another Ira Harge right there. There's an Ira Harge with Utah. So there's multiple Ira Harges in the extra player pool to begin with. And there's Jim Ard and all these players. Well, what I found very interesting when I started looking over the Memphis team and their extra players, I suddenly looked at most of these teams have 3. Utah has 4 extra players. San Diego 3, Kentucky 2, Carolina has 4. Well, you get to the bottom of this list and you go, wait a minute. There is Memphis. They have 8 extra players. Count them, 8. And so you can make up as many as 8 extra players for Memphis. They finished in 5th place. And you can take that 24-win team and basically boost their 10-man roster up to 18. And there was a person over the years who actually input those into a template. And I was able to get in touch with that template, and I printed it out. Well, the players that we're talking about here are Bill Chamberlain, Dave Lattin, Ron Franz, Charlie Williams, Bunny Wilson, the great Wendell Ladner, R.I.P., Darrell Carrier, three-point shooter extraordinaire, 16 games, and Magic Merv Jackson. Some notable names in ABA lore, but they're not going to turn this team around. But anyway, I had to print them out. There's just the extra players for Memphis: Bill, Wendell, Darrell, Bunny, Merv, Ron, Charlie, Dave Lattin. And they even adjusted, the person who input the figures, they even adjusted for the assists, because you hand out assists based on who got the shot off. They even modified the Memphis Tams team card and put that in the bunch as well. So these guys are good to go. When you play the Memphis Tams, you'll have a roster of 18 players. And you can see if you can replay the Memphis Tams season and see if they could go to the finals, which they probably would never do. They'd probably win 24 to 30 games, depending on what players you played on this roster. So anyway, that's the magic of the Fringe player. I hope you enjoyed the video. I really appreciate everyone who has watched the channel. I didn't really make a note, but we did reach the milestone of 200 subscribers. Anyway, I hope everyone has a great day and enjoy your Fringe players and whatever set you have. And till the next video, so long.